Hey guys, welcome to my video. Today I'm going to show you an incredible process that will help facilitate dramatic change in your life, and it's called the trigger awareness process, and it gives us a gateway into understanding what's really going on with us energetically. And once we do that, once we become more self-aware, we get to make different choices, and we get more conscious choices. And it's a technique that I teach all my paying clients, and I'm going to offer it to you for free in this video, and you can use it every day. It's very simple to use, and it's, like I say, it's a gateway into transformation, into change in our consciousness, and into becoming more self-aware and understanding what's really going on for us energetically, emotionally, physically, when we get to identify the triggers that are occurring in our lives. So let's jump straight into this. So the first point I want to make is to kind of identify, well, what's a trigger, right? What is a trigger? We hear this term all the time: trigger, provocation, and some people kind of need some clarity on what a trigger is. And for me, a trigger is something that causes a reaction, an emotion in us from an experience that happens, a situation that happens. So for example, when someone cuts in front of us in the traffic, we're driving our car and someone cuts in front of us, and there's an emotional reaction of annoyance or frustration or anger, that's a trigger, right? We are triggered in that moment. When someone says something to us that we don't like, it hurts us, right? It causes a level of emotional discomfort or pain. Again, that's a trigger. So a trigger is essentially an emotional charge that we experience in the mind and body. Okay, so that's a trigger. Okay, so why are our triggers useful? Why are they so helpful? Why are they so transformational? It's because they offer us this insight into self-awareness. And from self-awareness, there's a level of self-realization and actually some self-actualization. So triggers actually provide us the opportunity to have those breakthrough moments, right? Those aha moments. They facilitate transformational change. That's why triggers are so important. So when we're triggered, the invitation is to view our trigger as an opportunity to grow, to develop, to implement and facilitate change in our lives. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm actually going to show you the process now. I'm going to grab my whiteboard, and here's one I drew earlier. Here's one I made earlier. And I'm just going to talk you through this process. Okay, so up here is your trigger, right? This is your entry point, trigger. Okay, so you're triggered, and I'm going to use my own trigger as an example as we go through this explanation. So the trigger that I'm going to use as an example was a few years ago, I was triggered by my son. He came to me and he wanted to play, and I said no. He asked me several times, and I kept saying no, and eventually I got angry, right? I kind of shouted at him. I told him to go away. So I was triggered, right? There was an emotional charge. There was this emotional charge of anger. So the moment we are triggered, this triangle gets played out, right? It's like we assume a role within that trigger. Now, it's an inverted triangle. I'm sure you can see that. So at the bottom of the triangle is the letter V, right? That stands for victim, okay? So one of the roles that gets played out, is the role of the victim, okay? The other role is the role of the persecutor. That's the letter P there. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm hoping you can see it. And if you can't, it means the P means persecutor. Okay, so there's a victim, there's a persecutor, and the R over here is there's a rescuer. Okay, so this is true of all triggers. So whenever we are triggered, there's a victim, there's a persecutor, and there's a rescuer. So when I was triggered by my son, okay, this drama triangle got played out, and within that trigger, I was the victim, right? Because I'm the one who felt this emotional charge. I was the one who was angry. So I assumed this victim role, right? And it happens unconsciously and automatic, right? I automatically kind of assume that role of being the victim because I'm the one who was experiencing those emotions that came up for me. Okay, so I was the victim of the trigger. Now my son at 5 years old, he was the persecutor, right? Because he was asking something of me, or he was behaving in a way that actually caused me to feel angry, right? He wanted to play. I said no, I got angry, and he was the persecutor of the trigger in that example, okay? So I'm the victim, my son is the persecutor. Now there's often a rescuer, okay? So in this case, it was my ex-wife, right? My ex-partner, we were together at the time, we were married. She came and rescued the situation, i.e. she took him away and she went and played with him, right? So you can see how that triangle got played out in this trigger. I was the victim, my son was the persecutor, my ex-partner, my ex-wife, she came and rescued the situation, okay? Now, it's important for me to kind of make the point, sometimes there's not a rescuer, right? And when you do this process, don't get hung up on whether there's a rescuer or not, okay? There's always a victim, there's always a persecutor, and more often than not, there's a rescuer. And if you can't identify the rescuer, then don't worry, it's not about identifying the rescuer. It's understanding firstly the trigger, and then what role have you assumed, what role have you taken in that trigger, right? So I was the role of the victim, right? So my son triggered me, I was the victim in that situation. Now, right there is a valuable insight into what actually is going on when we get triggered, right? So I'm going to put this down. So my son came to me, wanted to play. I said no. He persisted. I got angry. I was triggered. And in the moment I got triggered and I expressed this emotion, I assumed the role of the victim. Okay? And in most cases, when we are triggered, more often than not, we assume the role of the victim. Now, why is that important? Because when we assume the role of the victim and we get embedded in this drama triangle, we are not in our power, okay? We are in our powerlessness, and we default into this poor me. Isn't my life so hard? Haven't I got it tough? All the kind of elements that come with this frequency, this energy of being a victim. And in the moment I realized this, and I actually did this process when I was triggered, I got to choose, right? Constantly choose, well, am I really a victim? Do I want to assume this role of victimhood? Is my son really the persecutor? And it's not so much about the persecutor, it's more about your role in it, right? This is about self-responsibility. So did I want to remain in my powerlessness? You know what I mean, right? You know what I mean. Did I want to remain in my victimhood, or was my choice to be actually no, right? I'm a powerful creator. I choose my life with authenticity, in my sovereignty, in my power, rather than being in my victimhood. So that's a beautiful tool for actually shifting you out of the lower, denser energy and the lower kind of energetic projection. Remember, it's all about energy and vibration, and what vibration we're sending out to the universe of being a victim, as opposed to being a powerful creator who is in some control of what they create, right? Because when we're in our victimhood, we're not in control, right? We are subject to circumstance. Everything is blaming, shaming, complaining, and that's what a victimhood status or victim mentality is. And yes, when we're unconscious, we are victims, right? We blame, we shame, and we complain. And this tool here kind of quickly identifies the kind of energy dynamics and the role that we've assumed in our trigger, right? So that's a beautiful tool for self-awareness, a beautiful tool for understanding where your energy and vibration is in that moment of your trigger, and the opportunity and the conscious choice to shift that. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. I'm going to grab my whiteboard again. There's another aspect to this as well. Sorry, I'm going to grab my pen. I should have had it on my lap or something handy. So the other aspect to this is that when we are triggered, right, the single point of entry of any trigger, this is really important. The single point of any trigger is fear. Okay, let me repeat that. The single point of any trigger is fear. Okay, I'm gonna write it down there. Fear is the cause of our trigger. So let's apply it to my example of being triggered by my son, right? So once, when I did this process, I realized what role I had assumed, and then I kind of went back, okay, I'm triggered because I'm fearful of something. And when I tuned in and thought about it, it became very apparent what I was fearful of, right? And it was this, that I was fearful of being a rubbish dad. I was fearful of failing my son. I was fearful of not being good enough as a father, okay? So in the moment my son came to me and said, hey, Dad, can we play? And I said no, and he persisted. Actually, what he was reflecting back to me was this deep-rooted fear of not being good enough as a father, okay? Because had I not had that fear, then I wouldn't have been triggered, right? I could have said no, and I could have continued to say no to him without getting angry at him, without being frustrated with him. And what he was actually highlighting to me in that moment was this energy that was deep within me, that I had this fear of failing him in some way. So when I realized that, right, the fear was present in me, I got to release that, okay? So our triggers identify what we're feeling and thinking about ourselves on a much deeper level. And in this case, it identified to me, I had this deep fear that was embedded in me around failing him as a father and being a rubbish dad. Now, had I not done this process, let me grab the board again. Had I not done this process, then there's no way I would have identified, first, that I was the victim, and secondly, there was unconscious fear, because I wasn't conscious of it in the trigger, right? I wasn't conscious of it, it just played out, I just got angry at him. But there was unconscious fear of being a bad dad, being a terrible dad, failing my son. And along with that fear, also came the frequencies of shame and guilt, right? Because once I said no to him and I got angry at him, on reflection, I was like, oh man, he's like 5 years old. All he wants to do is play with you. And the guilt kicked in, right? So the fear actually kicked off the guilt and the shame. You know, how could you shout at a 5-year-old? He's only 5 years old. Why are you shouting at him? Why are you denying him the opportunity to play with you? Well, because I'm fearful and actually unconsciously think that I'm failing him, that I'm not doing a good enough job, that I'm not a good father, right? So that energetically, that's what was playing out in my trigger, okay? So this is how transformational this can be, okay? Because once we shine the light on this, once I shone the light on the fact that actually there's a deep-rooted fear in me that I'm failing him as a dad, I was able to shift that, right? I was able to like fully accept that, hang on, yes, this fear is here, right? Rather than denying it and pushing it down and it not being identified that firstly I was the victim, then I was in fear because of the fear, I could accept it. I could accept, hang on, this is fully present. Let me put this down again. I could accept this is fully present in me, okay? And this is how we transcend our fears. That's how we release the energy, right? Is fully accepting that this is present, that, oh, actually, this is what's going on, and not judging ourselves for feeling fearful, right? Shining the light on them with our awareness and saying, this is present, and now I choose to make a different choice. I choose to make a conscious choice around how I interact with my son. So that's how powerful this process is. And once I did that, once I fully accepted that, right, that's when the energy shifted. That's when the relationship and the nature I had with my son changed, right? I could kind of interact with him knowing that there was a full acceptance of, I have this fear, it's present, and I'm not denying it. And there's freedom in that, right? Once you identify the fear, there's freedom in that, and it brings this ability, like I said, to make a different choice in your lives, to facilitate the change and become way more self-aware about what's really going on when we are triggered. So my invitation to you guys is to kind of incorporate this. It only takes like 3 or 4 minutes. So whenever you're next triggered, whenever there's an emotional charge, go through this process, identify what a role you assumed, identify what the fear is, and shine the light on it and fully accept that this fear is present. And you'll really notice the transformation that happens in you, right? Because the more self-aware we become, the more we understand energetically what's going on, the greater the shifts in our life, the greater the changes in our lives. And this is a very practical tool and technique that you can use. It doesn't take much time. When I did this, the first time I did this, it took about 3 or 4 minutes to identify what was going on. And then as I was triggered, there's lots of triggers. We get triggered by all sorts of things. I was very quickly able to incorporate this. So, I got down to like 30 seconds a minute to understand what was really going on and, shine that spotlight on what was happening to me energetically and emotionally to trigger me. And then from that place, implement the change and make conscious choice to shift and elevate into higher frequencies, more love, more joy, more abundance. So look, I really hope you have found this useful. Let me know what you think. Please start using this tool. It is truly transformational. I kind of, teach my paying clients, I teach them this technique, and I know for myself and all the people that I've taught this to, the transformation and change that this offers and the level of awareness that this brings. So yeah, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I'll be releasing more content. Let me know what you think in the comments. Sending you lots of love from my heart.